Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mindful Metal Jacket. I am Joe List. I appreciate you listening. Here is the very controversial intro. Some people say it's too long. Some people say it's too sexy. And some people say it's just right. Well, I don't know where to go from there, but this is Mindful Metal Jacket. I am now recording the intro on video, which is brutal for me because if I just catch a glimpse of my face and I have reflection of the laptop and my glasses, and I hate my face and myself, although I have to say my hair is looking pretty good right now. But many of you are probably listening on audio only, and you don't have to see my dumb, stupid face. So welcome wherever you're listening, whatever kind of platform you're listening or watching. If you're listening and not watching, you are able to watch now. The entire podcast is on video and it's on my YouTube. You can go find me on YouTube, Joe List, subscribe to that, or subscribe to the podcast in the way that you are listening. However you're listening, I appreciate you being here. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to try to keep this intro shorter than normal because people get really upset. But you can't please all the people, can you? Right? And I don't know. I guess I'll just get right into this episode. Actually, you know what? I have some dates I'm going to plug. So just buckle up, folks. I am going back on the road. I will be at Side Splitters in Tampa next weekend, March 18, 19, and 20. One of my favorite clubs. There'll be special guests. April 3rd, I'm in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I don't know the venue offhand. I should. I'm stupid. But Google Joe List Bridgeport, April 3rd. It'll come up. You can do it. I believe in you. And then I'll be in Kansas City, the Comedy Club of Kansas City, April 7th through the 9th or 8th through the 10th. I'm bad at this, obviously. I got to get better. But I think, in Austin, Paramount Theater, May 15th. Can't wait. I was just in Austin. I'll be back there in May 15th. I hope that you're doing well. I am filled with hope and some joy as more and more people get vaccinated and we can start to see an end to the pandemic, which to me has lasted, an amount of time that was really making me excited to get back. There was a few months where, I was enjoying not having to travel or live such a hectic lifestyle. And I know that's coming from a place of some privilege. And by privilege, I mean I was able to make money in my other job that isn't traveling around, which is podcasting, thanks to many of you. So thank you. That's neither here nor there. Maybe this is why the intro is too long. I go off the rails, but let's get to today's guest. It was wonderful conversation. Oh God, I'm juggling things. The video is going to look stupid. Today's guest was Kevin Griffin, a Buddhist teacher and author. Kevin is most known for his book, One Breath at a Time, Buddhism and the 12 Steps. He's also written several other books, Buddhism and the 12 Steps Workbook, Recovering Joy, A Mindful Life After Addiction, Loving Kindness, Buddhist Teachings for a Troubled World. You can go check him out, kevingriffin.net. He's been teaching meditation classes on Zoom. And I first heard him on the 10% Happier podcast with Dan Harris, which is a fantastic podcast that I recommend. And Kevin and I seem to have similar stories. He was a musician and he was a drinker and a pot smoker. He got sober, which we talk a lot about. And then he was very into meditation and Buddhism and became a teacher. And you'll hear all these things, all these stories. And he's a really funny guy and just an interesting guy. And I really enjoyed the hell out of the conversation. I got a lot out of it. I hope that you will too. And I guess I should wrap up. I don't want to be too long. I guess it's, sometimes you got to take on this constructive criticism. I'm too long, but here I am delaying and pausing and just staring into the camera like a creep. Anyways, I appreciate you guys listening. Let's get a nice, sexy quote out there. This is from Tara Brach's new book, which I'll show you guys if you're on camera. Tara Brach, Radical Compassion, who I mention a lot. I thanked her in my special Her books are great. Her podcast is great. I recommend her podcast. But here's a quote from somebody named, I'm going to butcher the name, Veronica, oh God, Tugaliva. Geez, it was going so well. Anyways, here's a quote from chapter 4 of Tara Brach's new book. We speak about losing our minds as if it's a bad thing. I say lose your mind. Do it purposefully. Find out who you really are beyond your thoughts and beliefs. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in this episode is not identifying with your thoughts and fears. You'll hear it all. It's one of my favorite episodes. So please enjoy this conversation with Kevin Griffin. Thank you for listening. I love you. Record. We're live. This is it. It always feels so strange at the beginning of a show because we're sitting here and then now it's a show, but it wasn't a moment ago.
Yeah, reality is a construct, so there you go. Whatever that means.
That's one of those terms and words I'll throw out there. I find myself just throwing things out there, particularly in interviews or discussions when I feel intimidated and nervous. I'll just throw things out. And as they're coming out, I say, I don't know what I just said.
As long as nobody challenges you on them, it's great because you sound like a smart person. But then if somebody asks you to actually explain what you just said, you're in deep shit. So
it's happened to me before. My favorite example of this, I wasn't involved, but my wife was on like an interview with somebody about a show, and the person asked, will your show be irreverent? And I'm so proud of my wife at this moment. We're similarly anxious and insecure. And she said, I'm so sorry. I hear that word all the time. I don't know what it means, to be honest. And then the person said, well, and then she just moved on to a different topic. So it was this great moment where my wife was brave enough to admit she didn't know the meaning of a word and discovered the person using it didn't know either.
That's a good one. Yeah. Watch what you ask people. Well, it's pretty simple. I mean, reverent, you understand what that means?
Sure. Yeah. I want to make it clear. I know what the word means.
Oh, okay. I just want to, maybe we should bring your wife on here so we can explain it to her. We can mansplain for her, be great.
But yeah, so reverence is, what's hard is there are words that you know what they mean, and then someone asks you to describe them, and I'm like, well,
everybody
reverence.
knows that.
Yeah. But anyways, it's funny because this leads me into, by the way, I'm not a journalist or an interviewer, so this could be
what the hell are you anyway?
Terrible at moments.
What's your excuse?
I'm a comedian and a podcaster, but and an anxiety sufferer and a meditator. So we will get into some things, but the most nervous I am in my life, ironically, is when I'm talking to Buddhists and teachers and meditators, people I go to feel calm, make me the most nervous. So I don't know what that is.
I totally relate to that. When I'm on a retreat with another teacher, I never raise my hand and ask a question. Like, I always want to be like, I'll just sit and listen. That's cool. And I'll tell you that the most nervous I get is when I have to introduce someone. I'm fine with getting up and giving a talk, but if I have to introduce someone else, that makes me totally nervous. I don't know,
Now, what is it that makes it nervous? That you're not going to do a good job or you'll ruin their resume?
I feel like, if I'm teaching, I feel like I'm just being myself. But if I'm introducing somebody else, I feel there's responsibility that I don't feel quite the same.
Right. So I want to get into some of these things. So do you identify yourself as a Buddhist? Are you a practicing Buddhist? Because some people, they meditate and they're versed in Buddhism, but aren't official Buddhists.
Yeah.
Where are you?
It's a whole other sort of it can be a sort of a technical conversation, but I it would be hard for me to claim that I wasn't a Buddhist, but I don't like to identify myself as that because of all the projections people have. I'm oddly enough, I'm happier to say I'm an alcoholic than to say I'm a Buddhist. So that's, yeah, but yeah, pretty clearly I must be, you know,
Right.
I'll let other people decide.
Yeah, that's fair. I think people have because people have said to me, "Well, you're like a Buddhist," and I'm like, I'm not a Buddhist. I just read books about Buddhism and written by Buddhists.
Yeah.
But I always say I would never identify myself as a Buddhist, but I would say the ideas and principles of Buddhism have helped change my life. But similarly, I say I'm an alcoholic every day of my life. So
Oh, yeah.
we have that in
That's
common.
good. My favorite people. You know, I remember reading a article about Roseanne Cash. I think it was in the New Yorker, where she was saying, she does this benefit for Tibet House in Manhattan every year, which is like a Buddhist place. And she's like, but I'm not a Buddhist. I could never be a Buddhist because I eat meat. And I thought, oh, well, I eat meat. But that's a typical assumption. Like Buddhists don't get angry and they don't eat meat and they wear robes or, whatever. It's just, you know.
Yeah, I've had that thought before. I'm like, I can't be a Buddhist. I had a panic attack 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But
anyway.
You are involved in mindfulness. Certainly, are you a meditation teacher? I came to find you through Dan Harris's podcast, and I thought I identified with so much, and then I thought I should get this guy on my podcast. I enjoy him, and then I just didn't. I didn't prepare. I never prepare questions. I thought this will just come natural. It'll be beautiful. But I guess some of the people listening may not be as familiar. So you are a Buddhist teacher. Maybe you could tell people a little bit of how I found you.
Sure. I'll talk about that. I am a Buddhist meditation teacher, and I kind of specialize in helping people who are in recovery learn meditation and really kind of work a recovery program and specifically the 12 steps through kind of a Buddhist lens. So I'm kind of offering this alternative approach to the 12 steps. So how do I, turn my will and my life over to the care of God if I'm an atheist, for instance? And I kind of give sort of Buddhist principles as a way and Buddhist teachings as a way into that. So, yeah, and I've been sober for 35 years, and I've been meditating and doing Buddhist practice for longer than that, actually.
Interesting, because so I'm a alcoholic as well, and I've been sober for about 8+ years now, 8 years and 3 or so months. And I was always drawn to meditation and Buddhism because since as early as I can remember, I had horrible, crippling anxiety. Of course, I didn't identify it as crippling anxiety when I was 5. I was just scared of everything. In fact, I just recently found some notes I saw like an analyst or therapist when I was 7.
Wow.
And these were notes that my mother had written back to him after talking to him. And she was saying, yes, Joe is afraid of AIDS. And this is 1989. So I thought I was going to get AIDS despite being 7 years old. And he's afraid of cancer and he's obsessed with graves. And I wish I had the notes here. And it just speaks to all these phobias, which was strange reading because I had all these mixed feelings of, none of these things are new, and it reminded me that these aren't my fault. I've been the way I am since I was 7, which, from what I understand, is the end of the formative years, 0 through 7, and so it was strange to read, and then also to read to kind of wonder what my parents thought of this and how come I didn't continue to go to therapy. But anyways, all that to say, I've been riddled with fear and anxiety my whole life, and I didn't start drinking till I was almost 19, which to me is late. All my friends had been drinking, but ironically, I was afraid to start drinking because I was afraid of where it would lead me. And of course, once I started drinking, I was afraid to stop drinking because I was afraid where that would lead me back to. But all that to say is I was interested in meditation and a meditation practice while I was drinking, but I did not have any amount of discipline to pursue it. But it sounds like you actually did pursue it and did do some meditation while you were out, as we say.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has their story, One of the ways that I view my story is of these kind of parallel paths, which in a way, we're both trying to address the same thing. For me, it's depression, not anxiety, but they're just flip sides of the same coin.
Right.
Like really, they are literally, I believe, partners that just kind of do a dance. But so throughout in my 20s, particularly, there was this kind of yearning for some kind of spiritual solution at the same time that I just was, smoking pot daily and drinking alcoholically, or, to, blackouts and et cetera, on a sort of, periodic basis. So there was this, and as I say, the drinking and drugging was trying to solve the same problem, right? Just like, with as it does for anxiety, that you're trying to get loaded to deal with the feelings that you can't manage. And so, yeah, I did, I think I inherited discipline from my father. He was a very disciplined person. And so I did learn to meditate. I first started doing TM when I was 28, and they just tell you do it 20 minutes twice a day. Just that's what you have to do. And I kind of, my Catholic upbringing kind of kicked in too, like, oh, I have to do this, or, something bad will happen, like
Right.
magical thinking, which can be helpful. And then, I got into Buddhism, which partly through a woman, it's like, oh, well, if I do Buddhist meditation, she'll like me more, sort of thing, typical guy. And I mean, Buddhism is so compelling. The teachings are so compelling. And so now, instead of just a meditation that was supposed to like fix me in some magical way, the Dharma started to like really make sense to me and inspire me. And I felt like, oh, these teachings, like they really speak to reality, to life. And there was like the magical component as well in my mind. But I was enough of a periodic drinker. And, as I got more into meditation, I seem to get more of a control over over everything else. I was able to like behave in a way that I could continue to stay in denial. But eventually the whole thing collapsed, as well, the meditation, as well as the control of the drinking and using, and then it was, sobriety or bust.
Right. Yeah. It feels like everything tends to collapse if you keep drinking and using. Because similarly, I wasn't meditating at that time, or maybe I tried to meditate here and there, or I tried to find something. The internet wasn't obviously for you it wasn't, but it wasn't as readily available in my 20s, I guess, or maybe it was, and I just didn't know how to use it. I don't know. But so meditation was sort of, to me, it felt like it was hard to come by, but I would always have some kind of exercise routine or writing routine. I was always one of these people that thought I could write or work out my way through it, or I had to get the right incense in my house and that would make me cure my thing. But exactly what you mentioned for me was an anxiety, and my anxiety led to depression, and I'm sure it works vice versa, like you said. But it was definitely trying to self-medicate, obviously, and which it would work for a while for me. I mean, drinking for me I was less anxious when I was drinking, no question about it. And then I was 50 times more anxious the next morning. And of course, you have to start drinking again to prevent it. And I always say this, I'm like, it ended up for a decade for me, I was either drinking, drunk, or hungover. I was one of those three states essentially for like 10 straight years. And obviously my anxiety didn't get any better.
Yeah. It's amazing the way I like the way you described when you didn't drink because you were afraid of what would happen. And then when you started drinking, you were afraid to stop. But, it just points to how we just put ourselves into these boxes, and we just sort of get these really, and I think particularly for addicts, it's usually how I refer to, alcoholic addicts. An alcoholic is an addict in my mind. But anyway, particularly for addicts, we really, we get into this like space that, as you're saying, we're afraid to step out of it. And it's one of the things that really cripples our lives, that because it's not just the drinking and using or the behavior we're trapped in. Typically, we're trapped in, relationships and jobs and family situations and all kinds of things because we have such a limited, I think in some ways, a really limited idea of our own agency, where there's this sort of helplessness that comes along with our addiction and that really limits our view of the world. Certainly was my experience. I just had a very limited idea of who I could be and what was, in a way, kind of safe. What were my potentials, and what can I just simply not do? Or I could never be happy having a day job, for instance, or I hate school. Just all the kind of stories. And then when I got sober and got a job and went back to school, I was happier than I'd ever been. So there you go.
Yeah, no, I was very similar. I feel like we have very similar stories because when I graduated high school and I thought everyone was kind of saying you got to go to college, and I thought I'm going to pursue comedy, which I did do. But my idea, I just felt like I had this very victim-y mentality of I'm tired of being told what to do and homework, and I started as the man, and everybody was against me, of course, which got worse when I started drinking, obviously. And I always felt like everything was happening to me. I didn't get on this show because they hate me or something, and I didn't get laughs this night because the audience hates me or whatever it was. Everything was happening to me is what I felt like. And this goes into meditation and Buddhism, I think, is you start identifying with all your thoughts, which is what gets you in real trouble. Is that I am this anxious guy. Instead of I'm experiencing anxiety, I am anxious, or I am depressed, or I am a loser, I'm a piece of shit, I procrastinate. And all those things, you just get caught in that cycle, in that wheel. And I had no skills or ability until basically relatively recently through a regular meditation practice that I am not, my thoughts are not reality, and fear is just fear. And also therapy has helped me. And it's interesting because I practice a 12-step program, but for me, it's like that can't be everything. I've needed therapy and Buddhism, the Dharma, as you talked about. But really, it's that identification that's helped me so much. So, if I could ask, how long were you drinking and using for, and what did it look like for you? You mentioned you were a blackout. Like I was like a vandal, and I would just go crazy. Did you go inward and isolate, or what kind of?
No. Well, I started drinking when I was 16 and I stopped when I was 35. I had kind of a strange arc. I started smoking pot when I was 17, and that also stopped when I was 35. and my drinking, and then I started using a lot more drugs in my late teens, and mixing it with alcohol, blending it with alcohol, um, and so actually my most dangerous period was in my late teens and early 20s, when that's when I probably had the most blackouts, and I would mix, barbiturates and alcohol, which is potentially a deadly combination, and whatever else, cocaine or uh, opiates, and but as I became a professional musician, and I was playing in clubs 5 and 6 nights a week, I had to then control it, and I also um, was what we used to call a short hitter. I don't know if you know, that's a common phrase anymore. A short hitter is somebody who really can't drink or take many drugs. They give out pretty easily. So I don't have a strong constitution. So I burn out on pretty much every drug. Like I took speed for about 6 months, and I just couldn't take it anymore. Like after that, I couldn't even drink coffee, and so and hallucinogens I kind of hated. And, I got to a point where I was just on a beer and marijuana maintenance. And I'm playing in clubs where you have to be like able to stand upright at 1 o'clock in the morning to play the last set. So, so I kind of, that in some ways saved me, but it also helped me stay in denial, right? Because I was able to sort of get away from the possibility of a real bottom. I would still, over the succeeding years, I would still occasionally drink to blackout, or get sick, or all that stuff. And I smoked pot, but the other part of my story was that I was smoking pot all day, so I didn't drink during the day, which was like another thing that showed I'm not an alcoholic.
Right.
I would just stay high all day, and then I would take a little break around dinner time, and we'd play the first set, and after the first set I'd smoke a joint, and after the second set I'd have a beer, and so on and on. It was all became this very routine thing. But as I say, then I would hit these other moments, like if maybe I didn't have any gigs for a while, and I'd be binging more, or things just got ugly at the end, because I was like cheating on my girlfriend, and stuff that I never really. I'd always sort of felt like I had some integrity, and I kind of lost it all, sort of in those last couple of years.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know that feeling, and that feeling of I would have this feeling of, I think I'm better than this. I think my parents raised me better than this. I have better morals than this, because, like I said, I was a vandal. First of all, very similar. I identify with the show, as I'm a performer and you're a performer, and I would always laugh about the show is in the way. I would do a gig up at some cool place or location or a city, and go, God, these two I got to do these two goddamn shows, and I have to pace, and it's annoying. Instead of I get to look at it as I get to do comedy. This is amazing. I make a living telling jokes, but at that point it was, I can't wait to finish these stupid shows so I can really get after it.
Right.
But I would, when I was drinking, I had all this anger, obviously suppressed anger, and I would just go crazy a lot of the times, and vandalize and steal stuff. That was my big thing. And breaking the arms off parking garages, that was a big thing I liked doing.
Oh, nice. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. I thought it was cool. And
why do you say obviously you had a lot of anger?
Well, I think it's obvious if you're running around breaking things, it seems like,
okay.
right? Maybe not. I don't know. Is that not?
That makes sense. Yeah.
But yeah, so I would be smashing and breaking things, but and then and I realize now some of that anger is still there, and just in the form of road rage or something. But I was talking to my
Sure.
wife the other day. We were walking. We were in like Austin or something, and I'm like, I still have the thought,
Yeah.
sober and years sober. I'm like, I would like to take that plant and just throw it across the street. I still have that in me,
Uh-huh.
that
Yeah.
rabble rousy thing. And some of that too is, growing up a Stones fan and they're throwing the TV out the window, and it just seemed cool to me. And I don't know if you had this feeling, but and I feel like some people can identify with this, is this idea of living life to the fullest. And to me, that meant, what that looked like to me was staying up till sunup, and this
Yeah.
idea of sort of Tom Waits and Frank Sinatra and the Stones. And that was living life to the fullest.
Tom Waits and Frank Sinatra rarely mentioned in the same sentence.
Yeah, well, but that idea of this bar room, stay up
Yeah.
late, looking
Yeah.
for dames, and so that's what I identified, was like, we gotta go, ring a ding ding and go to the diner and stay up all night. And
Yeah.
it's funny because
Absolutely.
fast forward years later, now my idea of like, I do a show and then my wife and I, we read and we talk about what we read, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, this is pretty fulfilling too. But a lot of it is that idea of what it means to be living. And that's how I felt throughout my 20s. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
identified.
Absolutely. No, I get that, I mean, because I wanted to be a rock and roll star. So, right away, you're kind of trying to make your world very big. And yeah, I always had this idea that like people who got up in the morning and went to work were just losers, I mean,
Same.
really, like, how lame is that? It's like, I'm living the life, I'm like, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning and I'm staring at the static on the TV screen, and I'm, trying to find a roach that's underneath the couch, and I think it's just awesome, I know, yeah, it's very weird, but I want to circle back to something though that came up for me as you were talking, which is the connection between fear and anger, because you identify anxiety as your kind of primary underlying emotional challenge. And then what comes out in when you're removing your inhibitions in a drunken, state is anger. And how, I usually think that anger is a result of fear. Like road rage. Road rage, the reason people get angry when they're driving is because they're afraid. They're not conscious of their fear, but something dangerous happens and they feel threatened. And the reaction is to protect themselves. It's very instinctive, right? The anger. Right. So it's interesting to think about, can that work the other way? Can anger, I don't think so. But anyway, I just wondering if there's some connection for you in that, Anyway, just analyze.
I mean, I feel like it can work the other way, that anger leads to anxiety, right? Because I mean, you feel this. For me, I mean, I have a huge fear of, or have had in my life, a huge fear of confrontation, or what I perceive as confrontation. So, having that fear of confrontation, of I need to say something, I need to stand up for myself in a family situation or whatever kind of professional situation, I guess does lead to this anxiety of, oh my God, what if I have to deal with this? Or maybe the anxiety started first, but
well, it's also control too, right?
Certainly.
I mean, that's what a lot of fear comes out of, is control. That's a lot, anyway, maybe I'm going too much into analyzing you.
No, I appreciate it. I need to be analyzed all the time, but I mean, control is, that's a big part. What drew me to stand up. It's funny because sometimes people are like, "Well, you're such an anxious person, yet you took this most fearful job of public speaking." But to me,
that occurred to me. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple things there. And one is, to me, the fear of not ever pursuing, like you mentioned, the idea of having like a 9 to 5 job, or what I perceived as being a loser, which I no longer do, as most of the people listening, I'm sure are working jobs. So God bless you. But that I had that fear of being stuck, like, my family or what I perceived as people doing these jobs they don't love. And the fear of not ever pursuing this thing that I always wanted to do was greater than any fear of getting on stage or failure. That was the ultimate fear to me, was to live a life without ever trying to do what I wanted to do. And also in stand-up comedy, and I think music is similar, it's the ultimate control. Ultimately, I'm controlling the conversation. You don't really get to say anything, and if you do, somebody kicks you out. You know what I mean? And the better gigs, some of them you have to get into.
Right.
But it is a situation where, I'm standing facing this way, and it also plays to my terminal uniqueness, as we say. I'm sort of this special person that's been placed here, is how my ego works. That it gives you the feeling of the illusion that you're the smartest person in the room, at least for 45 minutes or however long you're performing. So that I guess, I don't know. That made sense.
And I really like that way of thinking about your life. I mean, making that decision that you're gonna that your greatest fear is to not pursue what really inspires you. I think that's a beautiful that's a really good fear. That's a really that's not anxiety, that's like existential fear. And my version of that, a little different, was just realizing at a certain point that if I let fear stop me from doing things, that I would never accomplish anything in my life. And I have a brother. I have 4 brothers, but one of my brothers kind of did that with his life. Like, he will not be listening to this podcast, so I don't have to worry about it. But like, he just decided, like, he'd rather do nothing than have to do things that he was afraid of doing.
Right.
I don't know how consciously he made that decision, but it's definitely, and what an awful way to live your life, And I will say, for both of us, we're speaking about a decision that was only possible because of some degree of privilege in our lives. Because to make a choice to not get a job, to decide, I'm just going to play my guitar, is like someone who is not in some, I mean, I don't know that, I can't really speak for your background, but I know that, I was raised in privilege, and which I turned away from to become a musician, but nonetheless, it was there. And just being a white musician, I used to walk into bars in Boston with my guitar and walk up and say, "Can we audition to play here?" And just, had I not been white, probably couldn't have done that,
Right.
But also just the presumption of that I am, that I should be acknowledged and seen, is a privilege. As a white male, being a man, it's like, I assume that, like, you're going to want to hear me play my guitar, kind of thing. Whereas someone who was not raised and didn't have that kind of background isn't going to, and doesn't have any sense of like anything financial to fall back on, if something happens. All of that worked in my favor. And I've just, that's something that over the last few years, I've been becoming acutely aware of, that, all the things that I think were kind of choices, were only choices because of the position I was in to start with,
Right. Yeah, no, I think about things like that all the time. And it's hard because, I don't know, sometimes I have this with therapy and psychology, all this stuff of, well, who am I to have, and I guess it's tricky sometimes, because you're like, well, I was raised, and my parents, maybe they could have done a better job in places, but I was lucky enough to have two parents that never, physically abused me or even
Mhm.
emotionally abused me, and they were together. And we certainly, I mean, I would say we were middle to lower middle class, but I had clothes and I was fed, and I, went to a public school where there were teachers. It wasn't a dangerous place.
Mhm.
Um, so it's hard. And then I would feel this sort of guilt that I had a pretty idyllic life and then still ended up so anxious and scared and OCD and anxiety and all these things. And then I have to just go, all right, well, I couldn't control any of that, and here I am back in this same place. So I can't beat myself up, because sometimes my notion is to my instinct is to beat myself up for having it pretty good. And I go, well, look at all these people who come from broken homes or were physically abused. How the hell did they? And
Yeah,
that got me nowhere also.
you can't compare suffering. I mean, that's one of the things that I value about Buddhist teachings is the Buddha just points out that there's no escape from that. The wealthy and the privileged suffer. They suffer in different ways. I think Ajahn Chah, who's a famous Thai Buddhist master, said something like, poor people suffer like poor people and rich people suffer like rich people, but everyone suffers. And, and that's the way it is. I mean, I don't know if you've watched that interview with Meghan Markle and
I didn't know.
Prince Harry. It's really moving. My daughter encouraged me to watch it because I'm not sure I would have, and I have not paid attention to them. I thought Donald Trump was a lot more entertaining than them the last few years, so I was paying attention to him. But now that he's gone, God bless it. There was something else, in the sort of cultural ferment to pay attention to. And, what's striking is, I mean, there's a bunch that's striking. And as I say, I think it's a worthwhile thing to watch. But what's striking about what she points to in the royal family is their inability to acknowledge suffering, and clearly their inability to acknowledge their own suffering, much less her suffering, which they were completely unwilling to acknowledge, according to her. And she's pretty convincing. And that I think is, as you're pointing to, that can be another way, just sort of an ironic way that somebody in a position of privilege denies themselves care. It's like,
Right.
just because you're the royal family doesn't mean that you don't get depressed. It doesn't mean that you might not even need some therapy. It's like, and of course for them, though, I mean, it clearly just all comes from that, like, we must not let anyone see this. We must keep all this private. It would bring shame onto the royal family if blah blah. It's like, that kind of mentality, which to me is just archaic and foolish. But and we see it, of course, that's a big thing in the addiction world. And I hear people say it. I still have, I try to think back, having been sober this long, it's hard to remember sometimes. Did I feel shame about going to a 12-step program? I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to stop drinking, and I didn't want to admit, it wasn't exactly shame, but there's no doubt that shame and the wish to avoid public humiliation, what you view as public humiliation, is one of the real challenges for people in trying to get sober, right?
Absolutely. That you're talking about the royal family and privilege reminded me, there was a quote from Jim Carrey, the actor, comedian, where he said, "I wish everybody could be rich and famous for whatever period to see that that's not the answer."
I just
Um,
saw that video the other day someone sent to me. That
yeah,
was fantastic. That was really fantastic.
yeah, because he's somebody that was, homeless as a kid for a period, and his father got laid off
Oh,
and lived in a van with his family and the whole thing, and then was the
wow.
biggest movie star in the world, and seemingly more miserable than he was when he was a homeless person, or a homeless
Wow.
child. Um, and you hear so many stories like that of people striking it rich in whatever field. For me, more the entertainment field, because that's what I'm always interested in. And they're just completely miserable people.
Yeah.
Um, and there's so many people that are public figures that are clearly dealing with some serious issues, who are
Yeah.
in power and have money.
Yeah.
Um, I forget the second point I had. Sometimes this happens where my brain starts saying, all these thoughts come at once, and then I lose
Sure.
three of them but keep one of them. Um, but so I wanted to ask, so obviously at some point you got sober. I assume you hit some kind of bottom, and got involved in 12 step. How did becoming a Buddhist teacher come about? I mean, that must have been, I
Mm.
imagine there was some time between getting sober and that coming
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, there was for sure. Um, I, you know, uh, as I said, I started practicing Buddhism, and pretty seriously. I went on some long retreats before I got sober. And when I got sober, I kept meditating, and I kind of got back into it after sort of drifting from it somewhat. I got sort of back into it, but I was so busy like rebuilding my life in all the practical ways. Again, I kind of had thought like meditation will fix my life, but and I neglected all the things that practical things. So, I got sober and I went back to school, and things started to really change in terms of the externals for sure, as well as the internals. And then at like 6, 7 years sober, I started to get really seriously back into meditation. And now I had more of a, healthy psychological framework to build on, um, and so my meditation practice really deepened. And I live in Berkeley. There were two teachers here who had regular classes, and I became close with both of them and sat with them a lot, and was going on 10-day retreats every year, sometimes 2-week retreats. And so at about 12 years sober, this one year, a lot happened. Like I got engaged and I got invited into a teacher training program,
Oh,
because there was sort of at that point, most of the Buddhist teachers were like teaching retreats, like longer retreats, but there was an increasing sort of need for people to teach more just sort of drop-in classes and like a day long and things. And some of the senior teachers realized, oh, there's a lot of people around like me. I mean, I'd been practicing for 15, 17 years. A lot of people around who have the background to be teachers, but they're not going to commit to teaching month-long retreats or something,
mhm.
So let's train them. And so the Spirit Rock Meditation Center, where I was trained, and where I now I'm a regular, have a monthly class there. They started a program and they invited me into it, called Community Dharma Leaders, and we had a 2-year teacher training program. And during that time, I started to teach regularly, and pretty quickly I realized that there was this subset of the Buddhist community who were sober or were in recovery, and so I started to offer things for them, especially. Yeah.
And Spirit Rock, is that Jack Cornfield, or is that,
Yes,
that's
yes. Jack is the founder, or one of the co-founders there. Yeah.
yeah, he's wonderful. He's one of the guys that I found early when I started sort of discovering meditation, and there was a time in my life where I was really right before I got married, I was dealing with all this panic attacks that I hadn't had in a long time, and it was a really hard time. And I went to this bookstore and saw The Wise Heart, his book, The
Yeah.
Wise Heart, and it was like an old used hardcover copy,
Hmm.
and it was like a savior. It was amazing. And
He's a terrific teacher. He has he has a very deep understanding of Buddhism. He's also interested in a wide variety of kind of mystical traditions, but he's also a PhD psychologist. And, he's able to really get at, he's able to really connect that deep Buddhist psychology with contemporary Western emotional stuff and our humanness. Take it down off the mountaintop. And his book, A Path with Heart, which is from about 92 or 93, is kind of similar to A Wise Heart. A lot of stories. It's more, whereas A Wise Heart is like specifically, like he says, Buddhist psychology. A Path with Heart is called a guide to the promises and perils of the spiritual path. And that really helped me. I've seen a lot of people in recovery. It helped me in my recovery. I think for similar reasons that you're describing. It really gets to stuff that's very meaningful and very practical at the same time.
yeah, it's amazing that all these things sort of work in concert, which is one of those terms that I've heard people use, so I use.
Yeah,
But
good.
it is amazing how much, and to me, all of the things that really help me all come back to acceptance. I mean, sobriety,
Yeah.
12-step program, and Buddhism and meditation and therapy. I still go to therapy every week for years,
Mm-hmm.
and so many of these things come back to acceptance. It's so much of suffering is just resisting something that is.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because so many of these things are counterintuitive. Like when I was someone that had a lot of panic attacks, it was so hard. I would get so like livid with my therapist, who would say, you have to accept it. You're fighting it. It doesn't work to fight it. And it would make me crazy. And then all of a sudden, like so many things, sobriety is like this for me, there is like this moment of clarity where you're like, oh, I see. And to just experience it and go, oh, here's my anxiety, my stomach's, and to kind of sit and just experience these appearances in consciousness of, oh, my stomach feels a little funny, my heart's beating faster than it normally would, or I feel a little dizzy. And to realize that all of these things are just sort of experiences in consciousness, and you're not gonna die from anxiety or panic attack. And it's amazing how, but I guess I don't even know if I have a question. I'll just stop talking and volley it to you. But the acceptance is this through line through all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And I think it needs support. It needs support. It needs the support of compassion, and it needs the support of mindfulness, and it needs the support of wisdom. So what I mean by that is that when you're going through a panic attack, it really helps when you can have this attitude of compassion towards yourself. Like, oh, this is really difficult, and this would be hard for anybody, not just me, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And mindfulness, which is accepting it, means that I'm actually going to have to feel it. And that takes some practice to feel, to learn how to feel. So you need that clarity. And then the wisdom, one of the key, there's two wisdom factors, particularly. One is the reminder of impermanence. Oh, this is going to pass. So that's one of the things that makes it possible to accept it. Because if you think this is going to last forever, which is how it feels, it's going to be really hard to accept. You're going to think like, no, I can't live with this forever.
Right.
But remembering, oh, it's impermanent. Okay, that helps. And what you were talking about before, which is it's not me. And one of the things that I like to point to, and this is a mindfulness kind of perspective as well, is experiencing anxiety and depression as energetic states rather than as psychological states. Because they are, right. I mean, they're both, but when you bring mindfulness to the energetic level, it takes you out of the mental, argument or struggle, and takes you just onto this visceral experience of, oh, wow, that's intense. And we know, like, the line between anxiety and elation is very blurry.
Right.
Put somebody on a roller coaster, wow, they're sort of in a panic state, but they're enjoying it, Right. So, and I don't know. I mean, depression too can be felt as an energy, as like, oh, this is just this heavy energy in my body. And of course, one of the antidotes to both of them is to respond physically. And it happens that the antidote to both of them is activity, right? When you're active when there's anxiety, that's a way of burning it off, or kind of dissipating it. And when you're active with depression, it's a way of bringing the energy that you need. So I just find that it takes it out of this realm of like, oh, I have a problem. Oh God, like I'm anxious. What's wrong with me? Why am I anxious? What do I have to change in the world or in my life to fix that so that I won't? It's like, there's always something to be afraid of. I mean, you're going to die. We should be walking around in fear all the time. We don't know when we're going to die. Shit. I mean, damn, that's really a problem.
It is, but it's interesting because that's the thing with impermanence, is it works for this too shall pass, works with the good and the bad.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way, and it talks about that in the 12 steps of, we shouldn't get too excited either. Excitement can be bad,
Absolutely. I mean, I drank when I was happy because let's have fun. And I would drink when I was not happy because it was like I needed to cheer up. So it's just, that's so interesting. And what that's pointing to in Buddhist terms is that we want to let go of all of it.
Right.
Don't be attached to the good or the bad. Just see it all as this is just what's happening. It's coming, it's going. No reason to hold on to it. Enjoy it if it's pleasant. Don't fight it if it's unpleasant, and it's not going to become a problem.
Right. Yeah. My therapist, who's wonderful, and the audience is very familiar with him, Alan, who's not a Buddhist or in recovery or anything. He's just a trained social worker. He's not even a doctor or a psychologist. He's just a social worker. But it matters, I guess, relationships with people, because certain people, if you're having anxiety and your mother or your uncle goes, you're just nervous, it's anxiety.
Right.
You go, fuck you piece of shit. You don't know what I'm experiencing. But then my therapist says it's just anxiety, and it just completely disarms it, because I'm like, right. Oh yeah, it is just anxiety. I'm not dying. There's nothing wrong. It's just anxiety. But he always would say, that's just life. I so often I've come into my therapist's office or talk to other sober folks, and I'll say, I think, I got this problem. I'm going to hit them with this problem, and they're going to be dumbfounded, and we're going to sit here, and it's going to take an hour to really unfold this. And it's something like, I got to have a root canal. And he'll go, that's just life. He'll say, that's just life. What else? What else you got? Yeah. You're like, it helps to remind yourself that it is just life. And part of this, and I don't know if this is addiction, or everybody has this feeling of, I want my life to just be fully easy, no problems. I keep having this sense of
Right.
there's going to be this moment in life, or I have to remind myself I am never going to be a Tibetan Buddhist monk from the mountains who just sits and whatever. That's not who I am. That's not how I was raised.
Yeah.
It's not who I am. Life is not going to become this, problemless, glorious situation.
Yeah.
It's just life.
And that's an illusion anyway, so that's not a real person. And, I mean, it's interesting that, I know exactly what you're talking about, like the uncle or this, like, don't worry about it, you're just anxious. Where are they coming from? Typically they're coming from either denial because they've never allowed themselves to feel feelings, or they're afraid of your feelings. It's not that they are really bring the wisdom that your therapist has, which is this sort of open, compassionate acceptance. That's much more, push that aside. It's, we got, don't let those feelings come on. That's dangerous. And, and that's the really unhealthy thing that I'm sort of talking about with the royal family. It's like, it's not, they're not being like accepting, oh yes, well, you're being attacked in the press, just accept it. It's like, no, you just don't want to face it. You're afraid of those feelings. And so it is interesting that the same words, might be spoken, but with a completely different intent and a completely different understanding, and then thereby a completely different impact.
Right. Yeah, no, it's funny because it's just somebody saying it's just anxiety or it's just life. And the other thing my therapist always says that's become like a mantra of mine is he just says, of course. That's my impression of him. But
He's Jewish then?
I'll say, yeah, he is. I hope that didn't come off racist or prejudiced.
But just
I
sounded like somebody from Brooklyn.
I just nailed it. He is. He's a Lower East Side Jewish guy in his 60s, maybe 70s, I think, actually. Boy, I hope he doesn't. I hope I didn't overshoot the age on that. I think he might be in the 70s. It doesn't matter, but
I think he sounds like he's in his 50s to me. So,
well,
let's go with that.
No, I think he's got to be in his. I know he did a lot of marching and taking it to the streets in the 60s. He's
that's good.
He's just my hero in every way. But but he'll always say. He also, by the way, I mean, I'm just giving out all kinds of information now, but he also charges on a scale of whatever you're able to pay. He's wow. He's a wonderful socialist of a man. I love him.
He must have rent control then.
Probably
apartment.
Probably. But anyways, he's a wonderful man. But that's neither here nor there. No, it is here.
It's here and there.
but he'll always say, of course. And I'll say, I have this dentist appointment and I'm just freaking out and I can't. And he says, yeah, of course you are. That's what you do. And it really does help. And it's become a mantra of mine whenever I have anxiety or I'm down or I'm sad. I'm like, of course I'm sad. I didn't, whatever. I hung out with my family and they're stressful, or I have to fly tomorrow and I got to wake up, or whatever it is. Yeah. It really does help me to just kind of have his voice saying, of course.
I like the term normalize. When I learned that term, that helped me a lot. It's like, I realize that what I'm going through, even though it's difficult and unpleasant, it's normal. It's not because there's something wrong with me, because that's the one that gets me. Oh God, what's wrong with me? Other people can do this. Other people don't get anxious in the airports. Other people, don't care about having root canals. It's just me. And then you go, no, wait. Nobody likes root canals. Nobody likes airports. That's right. It's normal.
Right, exactly. And I also have to remind myself, and I've gotten better at this in the last couple of years, is I am doing it. Some people are so afraid of the dentist or whatever it is, doing shows or, whatever activity. So they just don't ever do that.
Yep.
So I'm like, well, at least I'm doing it. I'm just doing it with anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's That's how you do it. I mean, isn't that how they define courage? Courage isn't not feeling fear. Courage is doing it even though you feel the fear. And absolutely. I mean, that's what they teach us in the 12-step world, right? Show up, just suit up and show up. I mean, that's the thing that's saved my life. It's the thing that's made my life work. It's the reason I've been able to write books and do everything that I've done, get married, have a child. I mean, I could never do any of that stuff. I couldn't face any of it. Having a job. I mean, it was just too much. I couldn't handle it. School. I dropped out of high school. I went back to school in sobriety, and I was like, I love school. Oh yeah, I see what you do. You go and you show up every day. Oh, try sitting in the front row. Yeah, my sponsor taught me that.
Right.
I remember my Algebra 2 class. I had this teacher. I took it in summer school at Santa Monica College, community college, and every other sentence I would raise my hand. Wait, just slow down. Wait a minute. Show me that. Show me that again. Stuff that I never could have done before I was sober. Like to say, in other words, I don't understand, because I always had to know. I had to, I couldn't not know the answer.
Right.
But recovery 12-step programs taught me all of that, how to live.
Yeah, I've always said my favorite quality in a person is someone that said, and I guess it's full circle, talking about my wife earlier, is someone that says, I actually don't know. I'm not familiar with that. Tell me about that. It's just nice. And that's humility, I guess.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a sober guy, and he's a writer, and he always says, I drank for 20 years and I wrote 0 books, and I've been sober for 25 years and I've written 7 books. So take that information.
Yes.
It allows you to do things that you thought weren't possible. And for me, it's allowed me to be present and enjoy my life and enjoy this conversation. I know we got to wrap up, but Kevin, I'm really grateful that you were willing to do this, and I appreciate it. And can you tell the people where can they find you and your books and your website and all that stuff?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, it's been really fun talking with you. I'd just love to talk about recovery. My website is simply kevingriffin.net. And I have links to my 6 books on there. My best known book is One Breath at a Time, Buddhism and the 12 Steps. My latest book is Buddhism and the 12 Steps, Daily Reflections. And then there's 4 others in between. And right now I'm having Zoom classes twice a week. Tuesday mornings, it's morning at least on the West Coast, and Friday evenings. So people can just drop in. There's no charge, just like there's a link on my website. There you go. There's, probably everything you would need to know is there through my website.
Okay, amazing. I'm going to check out those classes. That sounds great.
Yeah, come in. It's been really nice. That just as soon as things shut down last March 13th, I started my first one, and I've been doing that twice a week ever since. And it's really nice because it gives me a way to be with people, and a lot of people that I've known that have come to different retreats and things around the country, and actually people in Europe as well. And it's not huge. It's like I get 30 or 40 people maybe, but really nice. And I guide a meditation, and then I talk, and I've been going through One Breath at a Time actually for the past year. We're on step 7 right now, but I just, have a 20-minute meditation, and then I talk for a little while. It's like an hour or so, very easy.
That sounds great. I did a very similar thing on Zoom as soon as we shut down with like-minded people, and we just happened to be on step 7 today also.
Oh,
so
really? That's funny.
Is it odd or is it God, as we say? And but no, and it's funny. It's because I keep sort of thinking about this. The shutdown, the pandemic has been extremely beneficial in some ways, in that it's allowed me to talk to people all over the country that I wouldn't normally be in a room with, and it's been pretty amazing for that, looking on the brighter side of it.
No, I mean, it's remarkable. I know. And for those of us who haven't been directly impacted, it's very strange in a way, but yeah, there's definitely that advantage. And I think it's going to change a lot of things going forward. I don't see that I would stop offering at least, weekly or at least occasional classes online at this point, which is something I never did before. So
Yeah, same. And it's allowed me to do the podcast like this, and it allowed us to
yeah,
get together. So,
great.
Kevin, thanks so much. I really got a lot out of this. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. You be sure and give me the link to it and put it up on my website too.
All right, awesome. Will do.
Mindful Metal Jacket is hosted by comedian Joe List. Produced by Joe List. Edited by Matt Kleinschmidt. Executive producers Robert Kelly and Matt Kleinschmidt for the Laugh Button Podcasts.